In the crisp air of May 1945, Hollywood's acclaimed director George Stevens, accompanied by a tight-knit crew from the U.S. Army Signal Corps' elite special coverage unit, often referred to as Special Film Project 186, engaged in a moment of irreverent levity, mocking the fallen Nazis with exaggerated gestures and sardonic poses captured on their 16mm color cameras. Adolf Hitler, the architect of unimaginable atrocities, had taken his own life in his Berlin bunker just days earlier on April 30th, and the once mighty Wehrmacht, the backbone of his war machine, lay shattered and defeated across the ravaged landscapes of Europe. This playful tomfoolery, perhaps a deliberate act of catharsis, served as a fragile barrier against the indelible scars of the horrors witnessed at Dachau, the infamous concentration camp whose liberation Stevens had personally documented mere weeks before, revealing gas chambers, emaciated survivors, and piles of unburied corpses that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Unwilling to rush back to the glittering studios of Hollywood, Stevens, a man driven by an unyielding sense of historical duty, resolved to chronicle the final throes and utter collapse of the Nazi regime with unflinching precision and artistic integrity. Thus, he and his dedicated team ventured deeper into the heart of the defeated Reich, arriving at Berchtesgaden, the picturesque Bavarian town nestled in the shadow of the Alps. Stevens had secured rare authorization to film atop the Obersalzberg, Hitler's secluded mountain retreat, a sprawling complex of villas, bunkers, and propaganda-fueled grandeur that once symbolized the Führer's untouchable power. Now, the Berghof, Hitler's personal chalet, with its panoramic views and opulent interiors, stood as a gutted ruin, its walls pockmarked by artillery fire and looted of treasures, a poignant emblem of the total demise of a genocidal ideology that had plunged the world into darkness and claimed tens of millions of lives. Departing from the somber heights of Obersalzberg, Stevens and his small band of cinematographers pressed on into neighboring Austria, first pausing in the elegant city of Salzburg, renowned for its Baroque architecture and Mozart heritage, before winding their way to Innsbruck, the gateway to the Tyrolean Alps. Their journey doubled as a bittersweet sightseeing tour through a nation that, under the Anschluss of 1938, had eagerly embraced the Nazi embrace, its citizens cheering Hitler's parades as if welcoming a long-lost brother, only to now grapple with the bitter fruits of that fateful union: devastated infrastructure, displaced populations, and a lingering stain of complicity. The intrepid camera team also motored southward to the Brenner Pass, the strategic Alpine gateway straddling the border with Italy and South Tyrol, where snow-capped peaks loomed over hairpin roads scarred by recent combat. While the Wehrmacht had formally laid down its arms in Italy and southern Germany following the collapse of Mussolini's puppet Salo Republic, pockets of resistance lingered elsewhere. Austria as a whole remained a patchwork of holdouts, and the Provisional Reich government holed up in Flensburg, a sleepy port town in northern Germany under Grand Admiral Karl Donitz's faltering leadership, stubbornly refused to capitulate fully to the advancing Soviet juggernaut, clinging to delusions of a negotiated peace even as Berlin smoldered in ruins. On May 6, 1945, acting on explicit orders from Donitz, Hitler's freshly appointed successor, who had inherited a crumbling empire, Colonel General Alfred Jodl, the steely operations chief of the OKW Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, boarded a Junkers Ju-52 transport and flew from Bavaria to Reims, France, the nerve center of Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, SHAF, to affix his signature to the instrument of unconditional surrender, sealing the fate of Nazi Germany in a dimly lit red schoolhouse that would echo through history as the Little Red Schoolhouse. Capturing this epical moment with his personal Leica camera was Lieutenant Colonel Bruce C. Clark. No, wait, the script's Kirk B. Lorton aligns closely with the renowned photojournalist Colonel Buell Bud Horton, Eisenhower's trusted lensman for World War II, whose candid shots immortalized the raw tension and finality of the proceedings. Jodl, a gaunt figure in his field gray uniform adorned with the Iron Cross, harbored faint, desperate hopes of brokering a separate armistice with the Western Allies, sparing his forces from the vengeful Red Army while perhaps preserving some shred of German sovereignty, a fantasy born of tactical maneuvering rather than remorse. Yet the negotiations in Schaeff's war room dragged on for agonizing hours, deadlocked in a haze of cigarette smoke and terse translations. Led by the indomitable General Dwight D. Eisenhower, who refused to attend personally to underscore the Allies' disdain, the delegation, comprising sharp-minded officers from the U.S., Britain, France, and the Soviet Union, demanded with ironclad resolve the total, unconditional capitulation of all German armed forces across every front, from the Arctic fjords to the Mediterranean shores, leaving no loopholes for evasion. Jodl balked, his face etched with the weight of a decision beyond his delegated authority, prompting the British and Americans to counter with a chilling ultimatum. Resume the relentless strategic bombing of German cities, unleashing waves of B-17s and Lancasters that had already reduced Hamburg and Dresden to ash. To preempt Soviet ire and ensure diplomatic harmony, a senior Soviet liaison officer, General Ivan Sosloparov, had been deliberately included in the proceedings, his presence a nod to the fragile Grand Alliance forged against fascism. It was only in the witching hours past midnight, as the clock ticked toward dawn, that a frantic radiogram crackled through from Donitz in Flensburg, granting Jodl the reluctant green light to commit the fatherland to oblivion. At precisely 2:41 a.m. on May 7, 1945, accounts very slightly on the minute, U.S. General Walter Bedell Smith, Eisenhower's chief of staff with his trademark pipe clenched in jaw, scrawled his name first, followed by the watchful Sosloparov for the USSR, and as a formal witness, French Major General François Seves, whose pen stroke bridged the Anglo-Saxon and Slavic spheres. Only then did Jodl, his hand steady despite the abyss yawning before him, append his signature, the scratch of nib on paper resounding like a death knell for the thousand-year Reich. Subsequently, the Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force, Dwight D. Eisenhower, broadcast the irrevocable decree. As of 11:01 p.m. Central European Time on May 8, 1945, hostilities would cease, ushering in an uneasy peace. The document's solemn preamble intoned, with the undersigned, acting by authority of the German High Command, hereby surrender unconditionally to the Supreme Commander, Allied Expeditionary Force, and simultaneously to the Soviet High Command, all forces on land, sea, and in the air who are at this date under German control. The words hung heavy, a legal guillotine, severing the last threads of resistance. When Joseph Stalin, the iron-fisted architect of the Red Army's scorched earth vengeance, learned of the Reims capitulation, effected without his direct imprimatur, he erupted in paroxysms of fury, his Georgian temper flaring like a Politburo purge, decrying it as a Western slight and demanding an encore performance within his sphere of influence to affirm Soviet primacy in the cataclysm that had devoured 27 million of his people. Yet the bulletin from Reims had already electrified the airwaves, leaping across continents via BBC and Voice of America broadcasts, prompting a tidal wave of surrenders. Opportunistic Wehrmacht units, haunted by tales of Siberian gulags and Cossack reprisals, opted en masse to lay down arms to the more merciful Americans, swelling POW camps from the Rhine to the Elbe. On May 7th, amid the mist-shrouded forests of southeast Germany, a lone cameraman from Special Film Project 186, his tripod steadied against the damp earth, rolled film on ragged columns of disarmed Germans shuffling toward uncertain futures, their rifles stacked in mocking pyramids under watchful GIs. Remove, in the quaint Styrian town of Tropa, now Opava, on the balmy evening of May 7th, the esteemed author Erich Kästner, survivor of Dresden's firestorm and chronicler of Weimar's lost innocence, scribed in his intimate diary amid flickering candlelight, the French radio station has proclaimed that Jodl has inked the capitulation decree, effective tomorrow at midnight. Yet the Bohemian broadcaster dismisses it as a vile enemy fabrication, a ploy to sow discord in our ranks. From shattered spires of Berlin, whispers filtered through the static. The Soviets, storming the Reich Chancellery's blood-soaked cellars, claimed to have unearthed the bloated corpses of propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels, his loyal wife Magda, and their 6 innocent children, poisoned in a macabre family suicide pact to evade the noose. Now, the once blustery radio towers fell eerily silent, their propaganda anthems supplanted by void. A profound hush enveloped the capital, broken only by the erratic buzz of cockchafers, those resilient, beetle-like sentinels of summer, careening blindly into the glow of a solitary, illuminated window, their armored shells a faint echo of the panzers that had terrorized Europe. Remove meanwhile in the brewing cauldron of Central Europe Czech partisans, hardened by years of Gestapo shadows and Lidice massacres, boldly redrew the frontiers mutilated by the 1938 Munich Agreement, which had callously ceded the Sudetenland's ethnic German enclaves to Hitler's voracious maw, igniting the dominoes of appeasement. Over the preceding fortnight, U.S. General George S. Patton's Third Army, fueled by audacious blitzkrieg tactics and endless Sherman tank columns, had surged forward at a blistering 30 to 40 kilometers per day, an unprecedented velocity rivaling Rommel's desert dashes, carving through the Sudeten hills like a mechanized scythe. By early May 1945, Patton's vanguard had breached the Czechoslovak border into Bohemia, outflanking demoralized SS remnants and Vlasov collaborators alike. On May 6th, spearheaded by the 2nd Infantry and 16th Armored Divisions, American units stormed into Plzeň, the historic beer brewing hub, whose Pilsner Urquell had once quenched imperial thirsts, liberating it from the iron grip of occupation with a thunder of liberating howitzers. The following day, May 7th, the GIS entry metamorphosed into a euphoric victory parade. Main Street transformed into a ribbon of trampled swastikas and fluttering Czech flags. Thousands of Plzeň's resilient citizens, their faces gaunt from rationing, but alight with unbridled ecstasy, surged forward in waves, showering the liberators with bouquets of lilacs, kisses from tear-streaked grandmothers, and cries of Nasdar. A chorus of cathartic joy that pierced the spring sky. For the first time since the blood-soaked beaches of Normandy, the cameramen of Special Film Project 186 could pivot their lenses from desolation to delight, capturing the spontaneous dances, the hoisted children atop tank hulls, and the defiant toasts with smuggled Pilsner that marked humanity's reclaiming of its stolen spirit. Applause vanished with the gnawing terrors that Plzeň might dissolve into yet another urban inferno, its cobblestones churned to rubble by SS diehards or Luftwaffe stragglers. Yet catastrophe loomed perilously close, for in Plzeň and its environs approximately 15,000 German troops, a motley force of weary lancers, fanatical Hitler youth, and entrenched garrisons, remained poised to pulverize any flicker of Czech uprising, their machine guns trained on the Vltava's bends. Fortunately, the 2 crack U.S. divisions, numbering over 20,000 battle-hardened troops with superior artillery and air cover, vastly outnumbered the foe, tipping the scales inexorably. Thus, the German commander, General Rudolf Toussaint, a pragmatic career officer untainted by SS zealotry, opted for the bitter pill of capitulation. At 2:15 p.m. on the afternoon of May 6, 1945, in a commandeered brewery office reeking of hops and defeat, Toussaint, his monocle glinting under the harsh bulb, scribed his name to the surrender terms, commanding his subordinates to halt all offensive actions forthwith, from sniper nests to supply depots. Moments later, in a tableau of tragic finality before his assembled staff officers and distraught wife, Toussaint drew his Walther pistol and ended his life with a single shot to the temple, his blood mingling with the spilled ink of history's verdict, a gesture of despair amid the ghosts of Munich's broken promises. Applause, applause, the American liberators, icons of transatlantic salvation, would linger in Plzeň for 7 grueling months, enforcing order amid food shortages and black market intrigues, before handing the reins to Soviet allies in December under the Yalta carve-up, a transition laced with mutual suspicion. The ousted German occupiers slunk from Plzeň streets forever, their jackboots echoing into oblivion. 6 interminable years of savage subjugation had etched indelible wounds upon the city's soul. From forced labor gangs shuffling to Skoda works factories churning out Messerschmitt parts, to midnight roundups of intellectuals for their Sciencestat's barbed wire. In March 1939, Hitler's Wehrmacht had brazenly shattered the Munich Accords, storming across the border in a blitz of panzers and panzerfaust to devour the young Republic of Czechoslovakia, proclaiming the protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia under the puppet Reichsprotector Konstantin von Neurath, later the sadistic Reinhard Heydrich, whose assassination in 1942 sparked Liddecy's annihilation. For the beleaguered folk of Plzeň, this meant endless torment under the lash of Gestapo terror. Curfews enforced by snarling shepherds, ration cards doled out like alms, and the chilling wail of synagogue violins silenced by Kristallnacht's flames. Approximately 3,000 Jewish citizens, merchants, rabbis, and tailors, whose families traced roots to the 14th century ghetto, were herded onto cattle cars bound for the extermination mills of Auschwitz and Treblinka, their fates a microcosm of the Holocaust's industrial savagery. Even as Donit's white flag fluttered, Field Marshal Ferdinand Schörner, the bloody Ferdinand, a mustachioed martinet with a penchant for drumhead executions, clung ferociously to Bohemia with his army group center, a fanatical Nazi whom Hitler, in his April 29th political testament scrawled amid bunker delirium, had bizarrely elevated to commander-in-chief of the Wehrmacht, supplanting the ailing Donitz in a spasm of Führerian paranoia. Adhering to his creed of strength through terror, Schörner, a veteran of Stalingrad's meat grinder, escalated brutality to fever pitch, transforming deserters into macabre spectacles. Strung from the stoutest oak or lamppost, their necks snapped with piano wire efficiency, placards dangling like indictments proclaiming, "I am a coward and refuse to defend German women and children from the Bolshevik hordes." As late as March 1945, amid the odors thawing floods, propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels, the venomous dwarf whose oratory had mesmerized millions, lauded this reign of fear in a Reichsrundfunk broadcast. Such methods have an undeniable impact, of course. At any rate, every soldier in Schörner's combat zone knows he can perish valiantly at the front or ignominiously at the rear. Either way, the fatherland endures. Escorted from Plzeň under the wary gaze of Czech resistance fighters, maquisards in threadbare greatcoats, their Sten guns slung low, the columns of German POWs trudged toward assembly points, a somber procession occasionally lightened by ironic banter or shared cigarettes. Yet the visuals, snapped by a U.S. Air Force Signal Corps cameraman perched on a half-tracks running board, painted an overly cordial veneer. In truth, amid the power vacuums preceding Allied arrival, where Gestapo ghosts and Sudeten German militias evaporated overnight, retaliatory excesses erupted like suppressed geysers, from summary hangings in village squares to barn burnings that crisped collaborators alive. This vengeful fervor found rhetorical fuel in the fiery edicts of Czechoslovakia's president-in-exile, Edvard Benes, the bespectacled statesman who, from his London eyrie even before the war's final salvos, thundered in clandestine broadcasts, "The Germans shall be repaid manifold, without pity or quarter, for every abomination inflicted upon our sacred soil since the Munich betrayal of 1938, every village razed, every child orphaned, every soul enslaved." U.S. patrols, rolling through Bohemia's mist-veiled valleys in olive-drab jeeps, stumbled repeatedly upon these grim harvestings. Bloated bodies swaying from barn rafters, their uniforms stripped to reveal tattooed blood types betraying SS affiliation. It was May 8, 1945, the irrevocable terminus of Europe's Second World War, a date etched in crimson across calendars from Oslo to Odessa. The Czechs extolled their Yankee saviors with garlands and gypsy fiddles, yet reserved a seething contempt for their erstwhile tormentors, a disdain as palpable as gunpowder residue. The cadavers of the fallen Teutons were unceremoniously loaded onto hay wagons, consigned to nameless ditches or lime pits, their interment a silent requiem. In Bohemia, Not a solitary tear moistened a cheek for the departed Hun. Retribution's ledger balanced in the soil's indifferent embrace. Perched precisely on the Soviet-American demarcation line, a hasty scribble on Yalta's maps that would birth the Iron Curtain. A cameraman from Special Film Project 186 framed these vignettes of partition fates. A Vermont National Guard officer, his M1 Garand slung casually, surrenders a sidearm at the barbed wire checkpoint. A ritual of trust amid the thaw. A paunchy German general, medals askew on his greatcoat, eases into a plush Horch convertible's leather embrace for a dignified capitulation, only to be chauffeured by a laconic U.S. military policeman to a barbed wire enclave reserved for brass hat notables, where interrogators awaited with yellow pads and polygraph prototypes. Those with the providence of connections or quick wits hitched rides on lumbering Wehrmacht Opel Blitz trucks, rumbling westward toward the perceived sanctuary of U.S. zones, their canvas flaps billowing like surrender flags. Interspersed amid the interminable snake of gray-clad footsloggers, rifles bartered for bread, boots caked in Sudeten mud, rumbled a few jubilant Czech lorries, festooned with tricolors and beer steins, their passengers belting folk anthems of reclaimed sovereignty. At precisely 12:30 p.m. on May 8, 1945, from the austere confines of Flensburg's naval barracks, Donitz makeshift court amid Schleswig-Holstein's dunes, Reich President Karl Donitz, the U-boat Wolfpack's grim reaper turned reluctant statesman, intoned a radio address to the fractured nation, his Baltic accent clipped with resolve. Men and women of the Greater German Reich. In my May 1st proclamation, wherein I announced the Führer's martyrdom and my assumption of his mantle, I vowed that my paramount duty was the preservation of German blood and soil. To fulfill this sacred charge, in the shadowed hours betwixt the 6th and 7th of May, I commanded the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht to proclaim the unconditional surrender of all combat formations across every theater, from Norway's fjords to the Greek Isles, from Courland's pockets to the Channel's ghosts. At 2,300 hours this evening, May 8th, the thunder of guns shall hush. Let us now bend our wills to reconstruction and redemption. Vast swaths of the vanquished Wehrmacht, stripped of illusions and illusions alike, trudged into captivity afoot, their Feldwebel barking hollow orders to ragged phalanxes. One anonymous Lancers, a Rhinelander conscript whose Eastern Front scars mapped to Odyssey from Smolensk to the Silesian Piasts, later evoked May 8th in fragmented reverie. Terror gripped us like frostbite in the Carpathians. Our minds reeled with phantoms of reprisal. What torments lay in wait these coming days? Encircled in Czechoslovakia's bear trap, escape a fever dream, survival a crapshoot. Then, like manna from a ruptured sky, the war evaporated. The new Führer of the Reich's tattered husk, Grand Admiral Karl Donitz, decreed the total capitulation of the Reich and Wehrmacht alike. At last, the apocalypse relented. 6 years of pulverizing flesh and forge, of mothers wailing over rubble cradles, of cities gutted like fish. But what dawned for us Germans now? My threadbare life endured the reaper's scythe, yet how to weave it anew? Would opportunity's door creak ajar, or slam forever on our prodigal brows? Concurrently across the Atlantic's vasty deep, on May 8th, U.S. President Harry S. Truman, the Missouri haberdasher thrust into Roosevelt's Colossus shoes, delivered a fireside address from the White House Rose Garden, his gravelly twang laced with Midwestern gravitas. This is a solemn but glorious hour in our nation's chronicle. Our jubilation tempers with profound reverence for the staggering toll exacted to exorcise Hitler and his infernal cabal from God's green earth, the 400,000 American sons interred from Pearl Harbor's pyre to Hurtgen's hell, the home front's rationed sinews stretched taut. As the Reichsvermin fled the foundering Leviathan on May 8, 1945, in the verdant environs of Kitzingen near Würzburg, a Franconian wine town whose cellars had sheltered fugitives, a burnished Luftwaffe ace deigned to pose for Special Film Project 180 SAXS Whirring Bell and Howl. With his Ju-87 Stuka squadron in tow, Hans Ulrich Rudel, the one-legged Oberst whose dive-bombing ledger tallied over 500 Soviet tanks and a Black Sea cruiser, had buzzed out of Bohemia's traps to tender his sword to the Yanks, his Jew 87's underbelly scarred by flak kisses. Rudel alone wore the Wehrmacht's pinnacle honor, the Knight's Cross with golden oak leaves, swords, and diamonds, a bauble forged from melted-down heroism for the Führer's most expendable gladiators. Yet beneath the aviator's elan lurked a zealot's core, a National Socialist evangelist who, in March 1945, from a Prague field hospital cot, his right leg amputated below the knee by AA shrapnel, starred in Goebbels' Die Deutsche Wochenschau newsreel, rasping through morphine haze. This juncture demands not mere personal forfeit, but collective Calvary. Every Aryan must gnash molars and embrace the ablation. In the finale, this Volk, unbowed, fang-bared through tempests, shall wrench triumph from destiny's jaws. To his American captors at Obersalzberg's interrogation pens, Rudel masqueraded as a patrician professional, a Luftwaffe laureate dutifully saluting martial codes, his monocle polished, anecdotes laced with chivalric flair. He languished in U.S. custody for nearly a 12-month, chafing under delousing powders and psych evals, before release in April 1946 saw him hawk scrap metal in a nascent haulage firm amid the Ruhr's skeletal cranes. But in 1948, sending the hounds of denazification, Rudel slithered via the Vatican ratlins, clandestine pipelines greased by Bishop Aloy's feudal sympathies, to Argentina's pampas, Perón's fascist haven. There, the Iron Gustav orchestrated Odessa-style succor for fugitive warlords, hobnobbing with Italian blackshirts like Eichmann's adjutants and Croatian Ustash butchers evading Interpol's net. Rudel closed the war maimed yet messianic, his prosthesis a badge of unrepentant creed, avowing in smuggled memoirs that National Socialism's folkish renewal was humanity's lost grail. On this fanatic spectrum, he mirrored Lieutenant General Adolf Galland, the Luftwaffe's tactical savant whose big weak dogfights had bloodied 8th Air Force bombers. Post-liberation from American stockades, Galland jetted to Buenos Aires, moonlighting as Perón's aerial consigliere, molding the Fuerza area with Me-262 blueprints and Eagle Day lore. Perón's 1955 topple hurled Galland back to Bavaria's beer gardens, while Rudel rechristened Hans Ulrich in Pulp Fiction, prop tyrants in Asunción and Santiago, his shadow flickering through Colonia Dignidad's barbed labyrinths, the Pinochet-era torture redoubt where XSS technicians honed electrodes on Mapuche dissidents. Till his 1982 demise from pancreatic siege, Rudel nurtured Germany's neo-Nazi rhizomes, the NPD's beer hall apostles and Viking Jugend skinheads, via missives and slush funds. His obsequies in Dornhausen devolved into a necromantic farce. Grizzled Kameraden snapping Heil Hitlers over the casket, Bundesluftwaffe phantoms thundering a forbidden missing man formation, dirge swelling to the Deutschlandlied's full trio of stanzas, anthemic ghosts defying the grunge set's pall. In London's fog-draped thoroughfares on May 8th, throngs coalesced into a roiling sea of Union Jacks and lipstick-smeared cheers. Piccadilly Circus, a maelstrom of sailors hoisting Wren girlfriends atop taxi bonnets, while Big Ben told VE Day's benediction. In his magisterial memoirs, Sir Winston Churchill, the bulldog statesman whose cigars had outlasted blitzkriegs, evoked the delirium. The enemy's abject capitulation ignited mankind's most prodigal rapture, a Dionysian surge from Helsinki's saunas to Harlem stoops. Europa's Armageddon had ground to its predestined terminus. The trampled and the tramplers alike exhaled ineffable easement. Battle-weary, pauperized yet indomitable, we savored a pinnacle of transcendence, genuflecting to Providence for duty's consummate boon, that whisper of absolution in the gale. Churchill commandeered the victory in Europe oration from Downing Street's baize-draped studio, his growl crackling coast to coast. It marked a quintet of years, almost to the hour since May 10, 1940, when amid France's implosion and Dunkirk's armada of little ships, he seized the coalition helm in Albion's nadir, vowing in Parliament's cradle, "I have naught to proffer but blood, exertion, tears, and sweat." His Hitler-loathing burned volcanic, From the poisoned dwarf screeds in the News of the World to the 1941 Some Chicken, Some Neck Jape, rendering V-Day his apotheosis, a vindication scripted by sphinxes. Applause. As Churchill motored through the mall in his Austin staff car, multitudes surged like biblical multitudes. Floral barges denting the Daimler's grill. His V sign, a semaphore of defiance, transmuted to delight. Yet scarce 2 lunations hence, in July's electoral thunderclap, the Tory colossus tumbled to Clement Attlee's socialist scimitar. Churchill exiled to Chartwell's easel and whiskey decanters, pondering the people's ingratitude. Trailing the sergeant-at-arms cradling the House of Commons silver mace, a Tudor relic forged in Elizabeth's reign, Speaker Douglas Clifton Brown processed toward Westminster Abbey, flanked by the Prime Minister and His Majesty's Cabinet, a phalanx of pinstripes and braid under Gothic vaults that had crowned Plantagenets. Within the nave, the assemblage intoned Isaac What 1707 paean, its Jacobean cadences a balm for blitz-scarred psyches. O God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come, our shelter from the stormy blast, and our eternal home, unchanging though the earth remove, or waters flow away. The service's egress heralded the royal lineage. King George VI, the stammering sovereign whose broadcasts had steadied the realm. Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mum of indomitable Tweed, and their heirs, Princesses Elizabeth, future regnant, and Margaret, blooms of Windsor resilience. Evacuation schemes to Ottawa's Governor-General's Lodge had been mooted in 1940's panic, but the consort demurred with steel-spined maternalism. The princesses shall not depart sans me. I shall not forsake the king, and the king, come hell or halberstadt, abandons not his post. Throughout the conflagration, from the Thames doodlebug dirges to V2's subterranean rumbles, the sovereigns endured in Buckingham's crosshairs, the Queen touring East End craters in her Ascot tweeds, murmuring solace to Cockney widows amid Anderson's shelter ghosts, her handbag a talisman of unflinching grace. May 9, 1945, in the Spartan barracks of Vyborn, a Moravian hamlet pocked by Panther X, emancipated Soviet Osterbeiter, the enslaved toilers, dragooned from Ukraine's Black Earth Caucasus and Belarus's birch groves after Barbarossa's 1941 deluge, erupted in primal revelry over the Teutonic vanquishing. Predominantly women, factory serfs, riveting Heinkel fuselages in Ravensbrück's orbit or harvesting beets under SS lashes, clutched balalaikas and scarves, their dances a whirlwind of Cossack fury and relief's delirium. For the Soviet Colossus's 170-odd ethnic tapestries, May 9th enshrined as the sacred day of victory over fascism, timed to the Moscow meridian, where Reims ink dried post-midnight, aligning the armistice with IL, 2 Sturmovik overflights. Stalin, the Koba of Kremlin's onion domes, peremptorily mandated a Berlin Redux at Karlshorst's Officers' Club, a Soviet staff farce on May 8th local time, deeming the French tableau's marginalization of Marshal Zhukov's proxy, Sesloparov, an affront to the great patriotic war's 27 million sepulchres, from Leningrad's siege famine to Stalingrad's charnel pits. On May 9th, Special Film Project 180 SXS roving technicolorists, jeep-mounted amid Vyborn's thatched roofs, captured the Bacchanal where a Politruck intoned the Vaz granite prose from Pravda's galleys. 3 annum past, the Corsican upstart bellowed his blueprint. Vivisect the Union, plunder the Caucasus oils, Ukraine's granaries, White Russia's flax, the Baltic pearls, and sundry satrapies. He bade raw, we shall anatomize Russia, ensuring her eternal supine. That was then. Providence, however, spurned the Austrian painter's folie. The Focke-Mord's tide pulverized his chimeras to cosmic dust. Verily, fate inverted the Vienna Dauber's delirium. The 1,000-year Reich lies prostrate, its legions genuflect in obeisance. The Soviet Huth-fire blazes triumphant. Though we harbor no designs to partition or pulverize Germania, let history's anvil forge equity from these embers. On May 9, 1945, a duo of U.S. Air Force cinematographers, their Mitchell cameras lashed to a Dodge weapons carrier's hood, documented the frantic exodus along a rutted byway hugging the German-Czechoslovak frontier, where Wehrmacht Flotsam, Ghost divisions, fleeing the Ivan's bayonet ballet, lurched toward the Stars and Stripes aegis. Their titular Field Marshal Ferdinand Schörner had long since cut and run, abandoning his Ostmark fiefdom to partisan ambushes and fuel-starved FW-190s. On that self-same May 9th, the Tyrolean Terrier, clad in mufti tweeds filched from a Salzburg haberdashery, pockets bulging with Reichsmarks filched from Flensburg's petty cash, hijacked a Fiesler Storch spotter plane for a hairpin hop to Carinthia's spas, only to be collared by the 36th Infantry Division's MPs in a hayloft hideout. His Iron Cross confiscated alongside a Luger etched with Blut UNDR. SS Black Order alumni, Himmler's spectral elite, who in April's Götterdämmerung had orchestrated the Prague Uprising's butchery, melted into the Wehrmacht's drab torrent, elbow to elbow with medics in Red Cross armbands and Fräuleins clutching typewriters, all funneling westward like the Volga's spring spate. These Hitler-Jungwelps, pubescent fanatics drilled with Panzerfausts in the Reichsarbeitsdienst, had clawed through too, their freckled faces belying the Ardennes foxholes. Sundry Germans tendered surrender with parade ground polish, their tunics brushed, boots blancoed. Oozing Herrenvolkoter, this Waffen-SS Obersturmführer, his Death's head collar tabs gleaming, strutted before the GIS as a foeman worthy of Valhalla, chin thrust like a Piesecke PFW turret. But the doughboys, wise to Malmedy's machine gun snowbanks and the Bulge's frozen perfidies, met his bluff with bayonet prods and laconic jeers. To the lensman sardonic gaze in Special Film Project 186, this strutting peacock epitomized the Aryan mythos. Blonde locks pomaded, blue eyes arctic, a eugenic poster boy, now reduced to a reel of ridicule. Across the demarcation's rusty scar, in the hamlet of Tannenbergstal nestled in the Franconian lacustrine folds, interminable queues of capitulant convoys gummed the lanes. Jeeps jockeying past Kubelwagens heaped with Mausers and MP40s. For the Oberkommando's parting fiat, a ghost of Prussian punctilio, the ranks disgorged armaments in regimented pyramids, oboists piping the Horst Wessel-Lied's dirge as a final insolence. On May 9, 1945, circa 10 million Germans, from Kriegsmarine flotillas scuttling in Baltic shallows to Afrika Korps repatriates limping from Tunisian cages, unburdened themselves of weaponry, the detritus of a Führer-orchestrated Armageddon that had immolated 60 to 85 million souls worldwide, from Nanking's rape to Babi Yar's ravine. Not one Oberkommando panjandrum, be it model suicide on the Elbe or Kesselring's Alpine redoubt, deemed mutiny against the Berlin bunker's lunacy, sparing the spring's feudal hecatombs. Post-Führer's Walther thunderclap, the carnage dragged on in idiocy, culminating in war's terminal septenary, where 95,000 Teutons, conscripts and Gauleiters alike, were fodder for foxholes and flak towers, their dog tags destined for Belzec's ashtray. Amid unconditional surrender's pandemonium, supply dumps ablaze, Fräuleins bartering heirlooms for Hershey bars, myriad rankers essayed incognito flight into Tyrol's Aries, shedding Feldgrau for Tyrolean lederhosen amid goat bells and Edelweiss. On May 10, 1945, Erich Kästner limned in his Troppa ledger vignettes ubiquitous across the Ostmark. The hobble of maimed marchers stretches to infinity, a gray river eroding the macadam. They hawk lucky strikes for fleeting pfennigs, bartering boot leather for bread crusts. Civilian garb commands famine prices, yet armoires yawn barren as Siberian mines. A neighbor bartered an antediluvian pair of strides for 450 Gaspers, a king's ransom. Envy gnaws, my sole nethergarment clings threadbare. A Gefreiter dangled to the Steiners 3 kilos of Leberwurst, a carton of Camels, and a century of crisp notes for a burgher's lounge suit. But the haggle foundered. Her Steiner sniffed undervaluation in the Black Bourse's frenzy. The Steiners mourned 2 Spragues to the meat grinder, one at Dieppe shingle, the other in Tunisia's dust. When a gawker mooted vending their broadcloth, ire flared typhoon, yet the paterfamilias gulped gall and bolted the portal, the echo a requiem for Servility's corpse. May 14, 1945, one septenary post the Reich's abject kneel. A special film project 186 detail prowled Augsburg spires. The Swabian jewel, whose Fuggerei almshouses had sheltered paupers since Habsburgs. Locals, their Weimar birthrights dust, reconciled to the swastika's eclipse and the olive-drab overseer's edicts, navigating curfews and coal queues with stoic pragmatism. The city had yielded sans fusillade to the 12th Armored Hellcats on April 28th, its Burgermeister waving a bedsheet from the Rathaus balcony as P-47 Thunderbolts buzzed approbation. Augsburg's burghers exhaled gratitude that Armageddon bypassed their hearths in a whimper, not Wagnerian bang, one diarist later mused. Defeat's dregs mingled with liberation's lees, a bifurcated elixir, bitter yet buoyant. The nemesis palpitated imminent, a miasma you could palpate in the Vordervorstadt's gusts. But emancipation's essence dawned gradual, like crocus's piercing permafrost. In a May 8th diary jotting, another Augsburgerin evoked the paradox. What halcyon dawn! Verdure unfurls verdant. Soul gilds the Lex meanders, azure vaults unblemished. One fancies pandemonium's peal, merriment's melee, lacrimal cataracts of rapture, campanile's clanging carillons, for freedom caresses every tongue, a shibboleth nursed through Hexaanum's Hades. Pax and Patria, the reverie that lulled our blitz-blackened slumbers. Augsburg's denizens ambled to lathes or promenades, as if the Nuremberg rallies pyres and Sobibor smokestacks were spectral fables, their strides unburdened by Führer frenzy or final solutions ledgers. Yet the conquerors, psyop pamphlets in hand, pierced the apolitical patina with inquisitorial barbs, who oaths swore to the party, who averted gaze from Yellow Star's parades, who harbored culpability's brand. General Eisenhower's Proclamation No. 1, inked in Schaeff's scriptorium and airdropped like manna, thundered, "We arrive as victors, not viceroys of vengeance. Nazism and Teutonic saber-rattling shall we extirpate root and rhizome, the brown-shirt tyranny topple, the NSDAP eviscerate, and the sadistic statutes, discriminatory edicts, and apparatus of oppression the party spawned, eugenic courts to euthanasia vans, abrogate utterly." The U.S. proconsuls arrived laden with blueprints for renewal, municipal hierarchies modeled on Philadelphia's grid, multi-partisan polities echoing Jefferson salons, Kulturscene blueprints aping Broadway's footlights, all predicated on Atlantic Charter's Democratic Catechism. Initially, Teutons demurred at this Yankee utopianism, their psyches scarred by Versailles diktat, quotidian salvos, potato peels, darning socks, eclipsed Vergangenheitsbewältigung specters. Myriad quashed the Schuldfrage, burying it beneath Biz 1 rubble, culminating in over 3 million Sprechkammer tribunals, ad hoc kangaroo courts in schoolhouses and gasthouses. The purge stratified supplicants. Hauptschuldiger archfiends, belasteter enablers, minder belaster fellow travelers, Mittläufer camp followers, entlasteter innocents. Roughly two-thirds adjudged Mittläufer or absolved, a statistical absolution that greased West Germany's Wirtschaftswunder rails. At war's denouement, the Allies zeroed on the Reich's apex predators. In Augsburg on May 14, 1945, the USAF contingent, Kodak stocks dwindling, snagged footage of the Nazi nomenclatura's paramount survivor, Reichsmarshal Hermann Göring, the obese opiate aficionado whose Luftwaffe had scorched Warsaw and Rotterdam. The 52-year-old Luftwaffe luminary, his iron crosses clinking like bar tabs, minced toward the Klieg lights with a sybarite smirk, his morphine-slurred bonhomie undimmed by the noose's shadow. Long the Führer's Bavarian doppelganger, co-pilot of the 1923 beer hall putsch, Prussian potentate, 4-year plan plenipotentiary. Göring had been cashiered in Hitler's April 23rd Führer bunker tantrum for a succession gambit via radiogram from Berchtesgaden, branded a traitor in the Testament's vitriol. Deluded he'd inherit the Eagle's eyrie. The Iron Eagle tendered his bulk to the 7th Armored at Fishhorn Castle on May 6th, spiriting a Borghese plunder of Rubens and Vermeers. Whisked to Augsburg's 15th Air Force Base for initial grilling, pre-Nuremberg limbo, he quipped to interrogators that Krieg resembled association football. Post-whistle. The vanquished clasps the victor's gauntlet. Slate white pristine. Post-nab. Goring pontificated that bellicosity mirrored the beautiful game. Loser's handshake erases grudges. A glib gambit to elude the scaffold's hemp. With roguish guile and Falstaffian fat, the marquis miscreant sidestepped accountability's glare. At an extempore press scrum in a Nisan hut, American scribe and novelist Klaus Mann, Thomas's scion Weimar exile, and OSS wordsmith prowling the Rhine's ruins, dissected the détenu. Unsavoriness eludes him. Au contraire, a veneer of bonhomie. Verily, his jowls betrayed a brute's undercurrent, and his orb often flickered with Mephistophelian malice. Yet his silhouette evoked the condottiere, ruthless rapacity laced with rogue's roguery, a jape in a jester's cap amid the gibbet's gloom. Had wind of the lagers' abattoirs wafted to Karen Hall, Goring bloviated, I'd have unleashed the Gestapo's fangs upon the perpetrators. Echoing the Volk's amnesiac chorus, the Reichsjäger saw scant summons to reckon with the Roma's ravines or jury's ash heaps. The Allies demurred. Goring headlined Nuremberg's docket in October 1946, Jackson's prosecution parading Zyklon B manifests and Wannsee protocols. Convicted on all counts, crimes against peace, war crimes, humanity's assault, the big shot drew the rope. Yet at Palazzo Nuremberg's gymnasial gallows, mere hours antecedent, he palmed a Prussic file, smuggled by bribed turnkey or loyal adjutant, gulping the almond bitter suicide draft. His parting sally, scrawled on linen, Fürs Wolfjar hab ich ein gutes Leben gehabt, a narc's epitaph for the Götterdämmerungsgorgon. June 1945 dawned humid over the Hanseatic North. George Stevens and his signal corps coterie motored toward Hamburg's Elbe mouth, the Venice of the North, whose Speicherstadt warehouses had bartered Baltic amber for Indie spices. Stevens hankered for Berlin's Brandenburg desolation, but the sprees remained a Soviet redoubt, Zhukov's Cossacks, patrolling the Adlon's chandeliers. Permissions embargo chafed since VE's fanfare. Interim dispatches clarified the Potsdam carve-ups timeline. July 1st would usher Allied plenipotentiaries into their quadrants. Only then might Stevens essay the Wolf's Lair's husk. Touching Hamburg's pockmarked quays, the troop primed at the storied harbor, cradle of the Bismarck's christening and Cap Arcona's watery beer. The Konterhospital's spires endured, but 80% of the dock sprawled as a Stygian maze, cratered piers sprouting twisted gantry cranes, U-boat pens yawning like Hades' maws, navigation lanes choked by the husks of 100-plus wrecks, from Liberty ships to from UND Lub Leviathans. Gammon urchins, their knees knobled from rubble scrambles, clustered round the Yanks Mitchells, mugging for posterity with V for victory digits and scab grins. Innocence's flicker in the Reich's requiem. The Halbstadtstrasse venerable Elbe Tunnel, that 1911 engineering marvel burrowing neath the tide, loomed as a portal to prelapsarian normalcy. In sweltering July 1943 Hamburg, the gateway to the world of Brahms' Lieder and Reeperbahn revels, drew Operation Gemara's Inferno. RAF Bomber Command's 791 Lancasters and Halifaxes, shepherded by Pathfinder flares, dumped 2,300 tons of blockbusters and 145,000 incendiaries over 4 nocturnal sorties, birthing firestorms that vortexed at 1,000 degrees Celsius, aspirating civilians into the maelstrom like chaff. Official tally 37,000 souls, though whispers tallied 42,600 vaporized in the Holocausts. Updraft, the world's deadliest aerial Armageddon till Hiroshima's mushroom. Serendipitously, the Kriegsende bypassed bloodshed. The Führer branded Hamburg a Festung to the Ultima Patrona. Yet Gauleiter Kaufmann's Realpolitik spurned the Nero decree's scorched earth, preserving the Elbe's arteries for occupation's ledger. On May 3, 1945, the Hanseatic holdout capitulated San Salvo to XXX Corps Tommies, white flags fluttering from the Michel spire. Stevens reconnoitered the apocalypse in his Willis MB, crunching over tesserae of St. Pauli's embers, his Leica framing the Jungfernstieg's skeletal facades. Hans Erich Nosack, The Hamburg literature, whose 1946 Der Untergang presaged Guntergrass, evoked the tabula rasa. One might presume traversing one's natal domain, now a lunar proluse, elicits ululation or upheave. Nay, 'tis not onerous, merely inapprehensible, a void devouring metric. That tonnage defies assay. 'Tis a plummet so abyssal, verbiage founders in the fathoms. For occupied Teutons the barest bulwark, watertight shelter, hearts flicker, pannikins brimming for the hearthside, sufficed as fortune's fulcrum amid the Bison's breadlines and Frau Barters. Early July 1945 liberated Stevens' convoy from Hamburg's hush, traversing the Elbe's Bailey spans, pontoons lashed against the ebbing tide, they vectored for Berlin's bomb bays. The crew husband spools of Kodachrome to limn the Chancellery's char and the Potsdam Conference's triune summit. Stalin's pipe, Truman's poker face, Churchill's, thence Attlee's bulldog bark. Diplomacy's epilogue to the Führer's farce.